Okay, now before we leave the subject of continuous controllers, remember how I talked about how there's an easy interchangeability and you can assign different things to different controllers and have a fair amount of flexibility. What I've done here is I've set up a patch on the quad reverb that has several parameters that can be controlled. And what I'll do is I'll play the EPS and show how some of the modulation capabilities of the EPS affect the sound. Then I'll play the MIDI guitar and show how completely different physical controllers can make the same difference to the sound.
Okay.
What I've done here is I've loaded a lead guitar patch into the EPS. Now the pitch bend bends pitch as you would expect. The modulation wheel adds a vibrato effect. And I've also used the aftertouch on the EPS to throw in an octave higher feedback sound and bend pitch up and bend vibrato. So it gives this kind of effect. So
Okay.
kind of a cool feedback sound.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, this doesn't have mod wheels and pitch bend wheels and polyphonic aftertouch on the keyboard.
Sure doesn't.
So what I've done is I'm using different physical controllers to do the same sort of thing. Like here, if we hit a note, there's a pressure plate that responds to modulation. Okay, so that's the equivalent of moving the mod wheel.
Okay.
For the pitch bend, well, obviously you want the string to do the pitch bending. So
Right.
the string pitch bend is set to control pitch bend. Now it could also be used to control other things as well, but in this case it seems pretty logical. So I try not to hit two strings at the same time. Then what I've done with the whammy bar here, which is normally used to control pitch, I've set this so that it actually affects pressure. So what this does is this adds that same kind of feedback. That I would get by pressing the keyboard.
Okay.
Okay, now if we throw this into a patch with a ton of echo or something, and I use the volume control, which is sending out controller 7 to turn down the EPS. So what I've been able to do here is translate these kind of gestural things that you do on a keyboard to a guitar. And all I've had to do is just set this to aftertouch, but this could also be pitch bend. I could have modulation being triggered from this. And that's an important point. This mod wheel, although I've been using it to control vibrato, you can set up a patch within the EPS so that it opens up a filter or does any one of a number of different things.
And if you associate that with your whammy bar in the same controller number, you
You're
can then
set.
control it.
Meanwhile, you can of course be controlling different parameters on the quad reverb and all that other stuff. So continuous controllers are a very, very powerful feature, whether you're playing a standard guitar, whether you're playing a MIDI instrument, whether you're sequencing changes into the quad reverb on a session. For example, you know how there's never enough hands when you're doing a mix?
Right.
Now, I mean, it's bad enough to worry about setting levels without having to sit there and tweak echo times and things like that. Just don't worry about that stuff. Sequence it all, sync it to tape, and let the sequencer be your engineering assistant and take care of making all the changes on the signal processors, while you can just go about your business setting the levels and taking care of the more mundane type things that require actual human intervention. Okay? And meanwhile, of course, as I mentioned, there are MIDI-controlled mixing units and all that, so that can be synchronized to your sequencer as well. In fact, a lot of times when you mix, it used to be when you'd mix a record, you'd be sort of like worrying about making these changes, then play it back to hear whether the changes were okay.
Right.
Now a lot of times when you're playing it back, you're just listening and hearing if any more edits need to be made. So in some ways, even though you're making all these adjustments, it's a more efficient way to mix because you can just sit back and be objective while the machines do the controlling.
Right.
And then if you reach a part where you go, oh gee, that's too loud, stop the sequencer, stop the tape, make an edit, go back to that same point and continue from there.
Very convenient.
Yeah, fun with controllers. Okay, we have one last controller thing I want to show that's a real neat little drum technique. So
Okay.
let's set up for that.
Great.